Welcome back to another episode of SheSpeaks, where we spotlight women driving innovation, leadership, and transformation in tech. Today, I'm joined by the brilliant Dr. Claire Knight, VP of Engineering at Odin. Odin is a platform reshaping how operator angels and communities invest in early stage startups. And with a career that spans GitHub, Netlify, and a host of other tech companies, Claire brings years of engineering leadership experience alongside a refreshing openness about what it really takes to thrive in this industry. From being the only woman on her degree course to leading global teams and mentoring the next generation of engineering managers, Claire's story is one of resilience, reinvention, and intentional impact. She shares candid reflections on hiring practices that prioritize people over perfection, what's changed, and also what hasn't in tech leadership, post-zero interest rate era, and why representation, even outside of traditional motherhood narratives, remains crucial. This episode will have the kind of conversation that will stick with you long after you've listened, if we're basing it on the first time we spoke, Claire. But welcome to the show. It's really nice to have you on here.
Thank you very much, Dee. It's a real pleasure to be here, and definitely enjoyed the conversations we've had so far prepping for this.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to continue that conversation. It might be shorter, it might be longer, but I think it would be longer, for sure, based on how well it was last time.
Yeah,
But
we did overrun, didn't we?
it was great. It was fantastic. So maybe we can start off with kind of career journeys to date. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. And I would say, on one hand, it looks really linear, like progressing up the levels, but on the other, it's not been that linear. I started out as what we now call a full stack engineer. That was the only type of engineer back then. We didn't have all of the specialisms that we have now. Just sharing my age there. Pretty traditional environment, but it was also a really good apprenticeship, if you like. And I learned a lot from more experienced colleagues. But it wasn't long before I felt the itch to move into more startup based, smaller companies. And yes, that scene has definitely changed in the UK over my career, particularly. But you know, the chaos and the building things from scratch and the kind of not just sort of turning up doing the same thing every day for 3 years or whatever, always being challenged is what I thrive on. I've worked in all sorts of domains, developer tools, gambling, fintech, and I've also been privileged to work with some really amazing people and lead some amazing teams, especially at GitHub and Netlify. I'm really proud of some of the teams that I've led there. Today, I'm at Odin, which is a relatively new venture for me, but we're scaling the tech and the team and organisation as we're growing. And I think one of the things that maybe it's worth talking about in some way is that along the way I have definitely started to care more about the meta level, not just what we build, which is obviously important for the business, that's a key deliverable, but how we build, how teams function, and how you run a good remote first team and or organization, and what it means to work in rapidly evolving context with a lot of ambiguity. It's not for everyone, I totally get that, but it's definitely my preferred space.
We'll talk a little bit more about that as well further into the conversation. You know, you're moving from being an engineer to leadership roles, and was that the plan for you all along, or did that happen organically for you?
No, very much organic. If you'd asked me at the start of my career, did I want to do that? One, I might have asked you what VP engineering was, but also I'd be like, people, don't do people. So no, it kind of came about because I started following the problems and stepping into the gap. So definitely very much an engineer in the early half of my career, first half of my career. And that was right. I think it's given me a massive breadth of grounding that I can then help all the teams I lead now over time with. But it was a case of working in smaller companies and working with the leadership and seeing gaps and being that person, possibly that idiot, depending on your perspective, that steps into that gap and goes, step here, I'm going to fill this gap. And that's how I started being a tech lead and then a lead developer and working directly with C-suite at small companies and doing that kind of, I suppose, leadership and more. I was still coding at the time, but more than just coding. it was then that I'm like, hold on a minute, maybe this is a career route that I care about. Maybe I want to be a manager. But again, I still wasn't necessarily thinking VP or CTO or anything at that point. I didn't know whether I like management. There's a lot I didn't know, and it's a very different job. That's not as recognised by people making that shift. A lot of people, both in and out of tech, think that going from a senior engineer to an engineering manager as a promotion is actually a sideward step. They're kind of all parallel. You can, in most companies now that are tech focused anyway, you can continue seniority just by being technical, albeit with some leadership, but no people management. And then there's the people side. So yeah, and it was interesting for me after the first 6 months of management. My skip level at the time said to me, "This is about the time people either go, I love this or I hate this. Where are you sitting?" And I surprised myself and possibly her by saying, actually, I really love this. And what I've realised as I've more intentionally focused on improving my management skills and leadership skills is that what I always enjoyed and still enjoy about coding is solving problems. It's never been code for code's sake for me. Now I solve people problems. And instead of plugging bits of code together, I have to go make sure people are doing the right things and plugging them together and resolving bugs between people instead of bugs between pieces of code. And I also, as certainly GitHub was there's a host of amazing engineers there, and I looked at them and went, they are so far ahead of me, and do I even want to do that? Whereas I think I can add value here, and I don't see any of them doing that type of thing. Very much in awe of many of the staff and principal engineers there, but I knew that I could add value to the business and the company by doing the people side, which they didn't want to do. And that kind of got me very comfortable with where I've kind of ended up in the last 5 to 8 years, going through manager, senior manager, director, senior director, and VP. Again, I would say go from manager to director or senior manager to director is a different shift. You're thinking much more broadly and upwards and outwards and downwards, as well as worrying about the team. But again, I actually really enjoyed that step change. I was ready for that step change and a different set of problems again.
Yeah. And, along that journey to becoming leader, were there any turning points or, were there any particular mentors that helped shape that path for you?
Definitely. I've been really lucky to have a handful of people that have either given me opportunities or helped me when I was in those opportunities. Most of them actually being female, which is unique in the fact that statistically speaking, there are far fewer women in those roles, but also they're the ones that have kind of like, you didn't show up great there, let me help you to be better at that so you can do that yourself going forward type of thing. Even people that were only one step above, sort of like senior manager when I was a manager or a director when I was a manager. They also were really helpful in influencing my thinking around, again, there's a misconception that the VP of Engineering, CTO, the boss, whoever that is, should be the smartest and the loudest. You should probably be neither. And there are times when I definitely have opinions for whatever reason that are fairly strongly held, because it's context I know that they don't, or something like that. But yeah, I try and very much be authentic, so stick to my style rather than be somebody else, and be genuine, because I think that helps. And then, yeah, I think it was a lot of small things that added up, I think, over time, plus my willingness to seek that out and talk to these people. And even now I have friends in VP and CTO roles, people I've worked with previously, so not just communities that I've fallen into. There are those as well, and we have catch-up calls and we share frustrations and stresses and how would you deal with this, because there's already a level of trust there and things. Yeah, I've definitely been blessed with a lot of people guiding me.
Yeah.
It's hard to pick one key point, because honestly it's been different things at different points as I've grown and learned, and the people around me have changed.
It's so important to have that support network. And I know I think it's always a shame that we have to use the word I was lucky to have women around me, because it would be nice if it wasn't just luck and it was just, a normal thing, right?
Yeah,
And that's kind of
definitely.
why, yeah, that's why we're having all these conversations to, hopefully inspire people, with stories like yours. And you've become one of those women, Claire, so,
I don't know about that, to be honest.
definitely think you have, being very humble. But kind of having worked with, both startups and those larger organizations, tech companies, what do you think are the biggest differences in leadership between the two?
Oh, good question. So on the surface, and if you ask other leaders outside of engineering, I mean, probably they wouldn't say there's any difference, but I think there's quite a large difference. In startups, you need momentum because without it, your startup's going to suffer. There's always ambiguity as well because you can never take enough time to get all of the data to be 99% certain because nothing's 100% certain. You have to be comfortable navigating that ambiguity and making decisions that are good enough at that point in time with the information that you have. I would say in larger companies, and I definitely started to see this at GitHub with the Microsoft leadership coming in before I left. It's all just about alignment and scale and making sure the right people talk to each other. Different problems, I would say. I would think for both leadership and engineers, honestly, your superpower in startups is being flexible, and the challenge is to be focused on the right things because what is right can change very, very quickly. In bigger companies, there's obviously a lot more people, which may sound daunting, but sometimes isn't, because you have people to help you and you have managers you can delegate things to and stuff. But there is also then it's harder to get that momentum. It's harder to get things moving. There's a lot more inertia. There's more clarity, coordination, showing up, being visible for people all the way down the org versus, hey team, we need to ship this thing, let's crank on it kind of thing in a startup space. So yeah, I think it's different from just the way the companies need to operate, the mindset that you need, I think, for anybody working at a smaller company startup versus a bigger company. You have to be prepared to do anything. I think in my job at the minute, I wear one of 4 or 5 hats depending on the day, whereas I have one hat and I'm very much expected to stay just wearing that one hat in a bigger company.
What do you think are the opportunities, kind of like at Odin, for example, right now you're helping scale that engineering function,
Yeah,
and you covered some of the challenges of like scale up as well, but what do you think are the opportunities around scaling tech team?
I love that part of the role. It's one of the reasons I took a step back in size to take this opportunity. There's so much excitement, there's so much potential. Yes, even in a 2 or 3-year-old company that's still tech debt, before anybody throws that one into the conversation, you have to deal with what you've got and everything, and there's still alignment even in a small company, but it's different. It's the other side of this is as well is not just hiring, which is the obvious answer here, I think, because obviously to scale something you need more people and everything, and hiring is one of those things, but it's hiring the right people at the right time. It's building cohesive teams, or team first, then teams, then an organization. And you have to look at that as a whole as well as the individuals. And I think that it's not trivial, even at the moment when there's a lot of people on the market and there's some great people I know out there looking for roles, but there's also a lot of AI and a lot of random applications, shall we say, to anything that we open, that makes it hard sometimes to spot those people as well. So there's a lot of intentional effort that I spend going through applications and looking at CVs and looking for key things, and these people can be probably perfectly brilliant engineers, but they're not the right thing for the team that I need at the minute, or we hire one person and that affects the balance of the team, so the next person I hire has to work with that new balance. I've worked with a lot of non-engineering leaders that just think you can pull the best of the best together and go bang, there's an amazing engineering team. But unless it's a cohesive team, unless they work as a team, unless you have different strengths and weaknesses spread around the team, you're not going to do the right things for the business, and you're also not going to do the right things for the individuals, because they will get stymied, they won't grow, they won't be happy, they won't be able to have the impact they look for, or not the impact. Again, you don't need 10,000 watt rock stars, or whatever the phrase was 10 years ago that everybody always wanted, because again, they just do the equivalent of what rock stars do. They throw TVs out the window and don't actually deliver things that you need as a business. So it's forming and building that team. It's constantly changing. Everything changes with whoever you add to the team, and some engineers might choose to move on. I have no problem with engineers taking the next step if I can't provide what they need in a given company. I will always support them in that. But again, then how you fill that hole might be different. You might not want a replacement for what you've had. You might go like, well, maybe somebody can do this shape of stuff instead of that shape of stuff. And so it's a huge balancing act, honestly.
Yeah, I can imagine. And, especially when you're trying to build those kind of hiring strategies around that as well. But I mean, what's your approach to hiring those engineering talent? And I know you mentioned like cultural fit as well before.
Yeah, for me, I like to start with a hiring manager conversation. Don't get me wrong, I have worked with, and I'm now working with a great talent partner who does that screening call and gets the admin out of the way, as it were. But I like to do that first, because I want to judge whether I think that person is going to fit with the engineers that I've got, or the ethos that we're building within the engineering team or the company. I don't throw them straight into tests or take homes, or however companies evaluate the engineers in that way. I find that you can learn so much just by talking to somebody, how they think, how they communicate, whether their curiosity is matching what the company needs. Again, I think in startups you need more curiosity than maybe in a bigger company. If you just want to turn up and do your job, bigger companies are great, startups maybe not so great. And again, it's not that I want to deny people a job, but I also want them to be happy in the job that they're in. So therefore, I feel it's part of my responsibility to screen them and do I think they would thrive in that environment? I also care less most of the time. Occasionally you need certain skill sets, but about specific tech, and I care more about willingness to collaborate and solve problems together. It's more about values for me, culture fit. I know often people say, oh, don't hire for culture fit just because you want to go have a beer with this person, or whatever. But to me, as values, are they going to come in with the right mindset? I can't teach mindset. I can teach technical skills. Ownership, flexibility, kindness are all really important attributes of the team players, whatever the team. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking for when I have what seem like open-ended conversations to the candidates, I'm sure. But
Yeah, I know we talk quite in depth about this, and I definitely quite like that approach, and I think it's so important to balance the two things. And you've worked across both US and UK tech ecosystems, and did
yeah.
you feel like you've noticed any differences in the hiring culture, scaling, or even the leadership style between the two regions?
That is another really good question. I like to think I'm not. I like to think I'm using the same lens for both, which gives a US taint to my UK stuff and a UK taint to my US stuff. I'd say that European companies and UK companies, i.e. not America, seem much more scared, much more risk averse in making a hire. Now, I wouldn't want to hire somebody only to get rid of them within a month or 3 months or whatever if they're not working out, because that's not great. You need to have a certain level of certainty. But probation periods exist for a reason. We may not have the hire and fire at will like many US states, but you can overanalyze things, and especially in a startup where you need to move fast. Bigger companies, probably haven't worked at any big company with purely a UK mindset, so I don't really want to comment on that. But I definitely see more fear and more risk aversion in the UK space. It's interesting from a candidate perspective. I think that's really, I'd say it's more down to the individuals than nationality in whether they're asking for things up front or being more humble. And I know there's cultural things about Brits like to shoot you down if you're a tall poppy, and Americans are much better at saying, "Hey, I did a thing." But I'm noticing that equalizing out over time, to be honest.
For me, I found just from a kind of hiring perspective, when I've worked, because in my last job I did work a lot with the US as well. From a candidate's perspective, I found it to be a lot more kind of two-way in the UK in terms of, candidates have more expectations and it treats it more like a kind of two-way thing, conversation in interviews, more so than the US. And I think it's because of the situation in the US with job market being not very great. And I think people just felt like they had a lot more to lose and they rely on jobs for a lot of things like healthcare even.
That's
So I
true.
definitely found that as well. I don't know if you would agree with that, but that's kind of been my experience. What do you think about that?
I'd say again, I can't categorize that by nationality. I actually talk about two-way interviewing in my hiring manager screen so that people know that I expect that in return. But I know that I'm slightly unusual in that regard. I've had both, but then again, a lot of the hiring I did early on in the US markets was in the ZERP era. Maybe people weren't as afraid because there was more jobs and the market wasn't as tough. But I've definitely had people ask all sorts of things from the UK market. Stuff that I think is great that they're asking, and even stuff like, I'm like, how certain do you want to be? Hold on a minute. Much like the companies won't always take a risk. Ironically, I think I've seen less risk taken by individuals as well about making a move and trying a job. Whereas I talk to a lot of my VP and CTO friends are US based, but like have conversations with them and they're like, what's the worst that could happen? You just quit in a year. Like as an engineer, not as a leader, you need longer than that. But we seem scared of that here more than over there.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't call your method unusual. I think it's refreshing
Okay.
more than unusual. I really like your approach to that as well, to the whole two-way thing. I think that's really important. And I know that you're quite, big on D&I initiatives as well. And I know you mentioned you were the only woman in your degree course, and your early kind of engineering roles. How have you seen the industry evolve in terms of diversity in tech?
I think it's massively improved, and I'm well aware that some people listening to this who've not been in the industry very long will be like, "Why is this woman saying? This is absolute rubbish." So I'm not denying that there's still a long way to go. It's just way better than it used to be. Just me being a dev in an engineering team was almost an act of rebellion, and the engineers, when you walk in on your first day, the other engineers will be like, "Oh." But I think there's a lot more awareness and support now in general, both company-wide and within engineering leadership. But things are slow, change is slow. Any change is slow, not just this. What I've been really happy to see personally in the last 5+ years, I think, again, probably because I wasn't looking before either, but is to see a lot more women leading teams and companies, because that's rewriting things from the top down more than just sort of having representation, if you like. And it gives people figureheads, people to look up to. I've definitely benefited from looking at a handful of people and going, I want to do what they're doing. I don't want to do what they're doing, type of thing. And doing some learning and emulating and whatever that is. Even generally, the conversations that happen in the workplace are different. It was definitely very broy when I started out, and I just happened to accidentally be sat in the middle of it back in the in-office days.
Accidentally, or you kind of had to.
Yeah, there wasn't much choice, really. Yeah.
Not too much choice around that, but no, it's definitely changed. And I'm very lucky currently to be working in the team as well, predominantly men, but they are such big advocates of more women taking up space in tech. So that it's just so refreshing and it's so nice to have that. It's very important.
I was just going to say I've actually worked again in the last decade with some really good allies, which has been refreshing because they didn't really exist before either. And I even went to bat for one of them where where somebody took something they said the wrong way, and I'm like, no, this dude's on our side. He is an ally. He's he's trying to help. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's nice, like one of my colleagues reached out to me yesterday and said, should we do a female tech leader fat roundtable soon? It'll be really cool. And I was, oh my God, that's amazing. Yeah, absolutely. But the fact that he approached me with that, it just kind of
Yeah, rather than you having
kind
to.
of,
Yeah, I
it's
love
really
that.
important to have that. Yeah,
It
it's
is.
amazing. Which of course, Claire, you are invited to.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely. Would love to have you there. But there's obviously a lot of focus, along with my kind of focus on women in tech initiatives. And I think, briefly discussed things like, motherhood and work-life balance as well. But what other perspectives do you think need to be highlighted, aside from that?
For me, I think there's a range of things. I think that's often overlooked. Women in tech show up in very different ways, much like women in society. But it's just as a magnifying glass on it within tech. Not everybody wants to be a manager or a founder. Not everybody wants to be a parent or can be a parent. I definitely know of people that wanted children and couldn't, and assuming that women can be painful to some people in a way that may not be appreciated. And what I really like now is that I'm at least acquainted with, even if I don't know super well, a breadth of people across the industry who demonstrate ambition in all its forms. Sometimes that's being a founder whilst being a mother. In other cases, it's doing deep technical work and still having a career path. Because again, there was a dearth of very, very senior women engineers for a long time. They were not getting past the basic stages. That it's okay to take a career break. That it's okay to be work focused as a woman. Nobody judges a man for putting their work first if that's their personal choice. But often women are judged on that. And I think there's also the kind of the financial empowerment and the decision making side of it. It isn't just, oh, there's a person of a different gender sat at our table or in this leadership team or whatever it is. It's about proper long term equity. Anything one gender can do in tech, the other ought to be able to do as well without judgment. Focus very heavily on women being parents and not necessarily the men being parents. And I also know a bunch of men that took advantage of really nicely generous parental leaves from some of the big tech companies, and we're very grateful for it. And again, we should applaud that on the other side of it. That's the kind of equity that I'm looking for, not just support women in these spaces, but support the men that take that equitable path. Much like you said, your colleague was like, hey, let's do this roundtable dinner, and have women leaders. I like the fact that these men are like, hey, yes, I do want to spend time with my kid when it's born. Yeah, I do want to spend time with my partner. That kind of stuff is the thing that for me feels good, because it's about equity. It isn't about pushing any one side more than the other.
To get to a stage where it's just so normal for that to happen that we don't have to applaud any
Absolutely.
gender for doing that, because it's the bare minimum a parent needs to do, whether you're a mother or father.
Yeah.
So I think that's the goal. It's so nice that we have this now. I do have like a friend whose husband was able to take a year off as well to look after the baby, and that was just so generous. But at the same time, that should be normal.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can get there one day. And how do you think we can make more inclusive for women and underrepresented groups beyond just the kind of hiring numbers?
Retention, honestly, that's huge. No, I don't mean retention for retention's sake, because actually having no turnover can be unhealthy for a team or an organization, even though we don't say that out loud very often. But it's not enough to bring people in. You need an environment where people want to stay, which comes back to my point when I started out being in a broy environment. Most women engineers that I know now wouldn't stand for that, quite rightly. But that was the cultural norm then, and it shouldn't be. So again, we're looking at psychological safety, a feeling of belonging in the environment. Then there's also like sort of growth opportunities and having systems that don't default to the majority, if you see what I mean. Again, coming back to that bro analogy, if that's accepted, regardless of what anybody's values are or what any company says it does and tolerates, if that's accepted kind of conversation, then that will become the norm, and that's defaulting to the majority and maybe unintentionally offensive. Because I'm not saying a lot of this has gone through malice, it's done through not thinking, I think, with a lot of younger people particularly. You don't just have a checklist. Right, well, we did a Women's Month thing, we did a Black History Month check. You actually have to live all of these values, and that's what I mean by retention and an environment where people want to stay. It's how meetings are run. Do you make space for people that are quieter on that spectrum? How do you promote people? Is there a clear anybody can if they do X, Y, and Z path to it, or is there the favoritism for whatever reason? How do you handle feedback? Do you take it? People giving me feedback. Am I able to take that from everybody? And likewise, when I give feedback out, it tries to be constructive if people are willing to listen to that. And do I then put as much effort into any given person as long as they're willing to listen to that? There's a lot of nuance, I would say, in inclusion and belonging. We could spend hours just talking about that, to be honest.
We can.
Yeah, we don't have the time, but but it's a massive topic. But I think that's the big one, making people feel happy and that they belong. Because when people feel that they belong, they do good work. They support the team. The teammate is sick, they'll step in and cover, or the deadline, and they all pull together. That's all stems from belonging, really.
Even if you've disagreed with someone, it's about sitting down and trying to understand them, because we're not always going to agree. We're not always going to see eye to eye, but you can't have an argument over it. It's not productive. It's not great. A lot of the problems in the world are because people are acting like children and not sitting down and actually talking about their problems and their differences. And one of the kind of things in a previous job that I had, the HR department would do really well is they would address, different holidays, cultural holidays, but they would always do this thing where, everyone bringing food. Food is always going to be the thing that brings everyone together. Yeah, like cultural food, stories, whatever it is, would bring it together, and it would just be everyone from all sorts of backgrounds just standing around and talking to each other. Such a nice way of doing it rather than just sending out a newsletter.
We've had that in remote environment as well, and maybe not necessarily HR driven, but I've been lucky to work with people around the globe in remote companies, and most of them, given the companies I'm at, are fairly curious sorts of people, at least within the engineering orgs anyway, and which is where I mostly virtually hang out, and that has been so cool, like exchanging recipes, taking pictures of weird candy in the shop and sharing it, and people going, what the hell are you doing in your country? Just silly things, or what on the surface are silly things, are actually really nice ways to bond and to talk about things, and to then go, oh, I made that recipe, or oh, that looks really good, I'm really jealous, can you come and go cook it for me? Which we know is at least a 9-hour plane ride, but it's again that kind of good kind of bantering, communication, chatting, just being humans together rather than colleagues. It's definitely been something I've enjoyed in the remote companies, and sometimes when I'm in ones that are very, this is not common on Odin, because we have people in Europe, but companies that are not spread about, I find it quite insular sometimes because it's very British, very local to the area. Like come on, there's a world out there. Let's embrace that.
Yeah, it's almost like you're trying to, even remotely, I think it's more important trying to create this kind of like, the kitchen is always the heart of the home.
Yeah.
You're trying to create a similar environment for people to just sit around and talk and stuff. So I love that. I think it's so important, and it's the most natural way of bonding with people as well. I think definitely agree with that. Just going kind of a little bit more towards the future of kind of tech and AI. I mean, what do you think are the emerging trends in software engineering or AI that kind of excite you the most?
Ooh, there's so much again we can talk about here. I'm excited by it, and I'm bullish on it in general. I will caveat that saying that it's going to change the role, and I'm not good enough to say exactly how it's going to change the role. But I also think it's very overhyped and very overblown at the minute, and unfortunately, too many execs are believing the hype. So I think the Copilot paradigm works very, very well in things like software engineering, inner constraint. This piece of code does this thing, but you do have to treat it like a junior that's forgotten critical thinking. It can do critical thinking around, say, if you ask it, where are the likely security flaws in this code? But it can't. It'll go. I had a situation the other day which was not around security, where I sometimes play dumb with these tools to see what they can do and things, and it changed the code, then it changed the test, then it changed the code, then it changed the test, and we just got in this effectively infinite loop. Whereas if it stopped and looked and thought about it, it would need to make one change in the code, which was definitely broken, but it also needed to make one change in the test, and it was just flip-flopping between the two. It couldn't stand back and take a kind of look at that at the moment, and I think that will improve. That will be solved. And I know that a lot of junior engineers, particularly, or early career engineers, are worried. I think that's partly the job market, but what I think it probably will do is the people that just literally want to turn up, follow a ticket where everything's specced out and not think about it, are going to struggle in the future. That's a lot easier to automate than somebody that takes critical thinking and real problem solving. There's a term which didn't used to be a term because it's tech and we have to relabel things every so often, but product engineering. I think people that are product engineers, so think about the business and the problem, not just the code or the tech, will thrive in this space because they will still be needed to wrangle all of these agents, even if we go to full-on agentic systems and dynamic systems that can do multiple steps. And you still need to string these tools together. You still need to orchestrate them with a human overview. You need to make sure they're safe. You need to make sure they're productionized. That's another thing the tooling can't do at the minute at all, is really productionize stuff yet. It can great at demos. You try and put any like real world complexity in there, they start falling apart again. It's something that I've also been, my dev tooling background and focused on lately with a side project around event driven backend infrastructure, because that is a huge unlock for making AI practical in real apps. A lot of what we have done up to now has been very deterministic. Code is always deterministic. AI is making things probabilistic, because if you use generative AI and it comes back and you're like, how good is this? And there's some evaluation on that, and it's like, well, it's a 0.5 on the 0 to 1, and you'll be like, well, I'll throw that away then. And what happens? Do we stop the processing? Do we reprocess it? There's a lot of stuff like that I think is going to change how we build systems as well. And honestly, engineers that understand system design and event-driven architectures are still going to be super valuable for a good while yet.
And how do you think that's going to change in the next 4 to 5 years, but especially more around kind of how do you deal with that as a leader as well?
I'm trying to educate my engineers on what it takes to be a future-proof engineer. So being involved in critical thinking about the product, even if you're not in a product role, using the tools. We pay for 2 different AI co-pilot tools, so that we're on the proper business tiers. The data isn't used for training, all of those things, and they're available to the engineers. And I want to expose them to that and have them learn to use these tools, because that's not going away. It's how you upskill your engineers has changed in one way, how you guide them on a career. I also think from an engineering leadership point of view, and even a business leadership, possibly, depending on the company, you'll need to start thinking about model selection, safety. I've never been a CISO. I want to be very clear on that. I'm not a security officer, but a lot of what they've looked about in the past is pen testing for the obvious intrusion things. Are we protecting the intellectual property? Are we password protecting the devices our employees use? Are we safeguarding our customer data? All great things that don't go away, but then we're gonna have to be like, what does it mean to safely use AI? What does it mean to not have hallucinations or to mislead customers or ourselves or whatever? And there's also going to be a lot more, even more integration than there has been before, plugging things together. We've gone up the levels over the years. I was never employed to do assembly programming, but some people were. There's like the early high-level languages, probably 3rd generation. There's a whole theory of programming languages, and I've forgotten some of it. And then we went from maybe C or C++, where you had to do a lot of stuff yourself, into, that's why Java was invented. And then we've had, JavaScript really taken off. We've had Swift and other languages that help the engineers. This is just one step up again, that you may not write every single line of code anymore, but you still have to think about the whole system. So I think from a leadership perspective, you need to be able to do that as well. Even if you haven't been an engineer in space, you have to upskill in that to understand all of that, because as a leader, I need to be able to wrangle humans and AI, honestly.
You do wonder if it's making things easier, AI, or if it's complicating things a little bit even more because it just gives you so much more to think about.
It does. And again, coming back to this point where everybody outside of engineering is believing hype, because for my entire career, non-engineering has basically said, how can we get rid of engineering? They cost money and they're annoying and they don't deliver what we want on the timeframes we want. Although we try, I promise we try. That's the hard part. It's like, yeah, you can knock up a demo in Chat GPT using one of those custom GPTs, but you try productionizing that. You try putting that's auditable, that's observable, that is demonstrably secure, that we have evaluations on, that check the outputs, that are not putting out something heinous to the customer. All of that takes time and effort, and yes, complexity, sadly.
You're also like an angel investor and advisor as well, which I know you mentioned, but what kind of startups or innovations are kind of catching your eye right now?
I do get a lot of people on LinkedIn pinging me about random investments, but I only invest in what I know, which is the developer tooling space. I'll be honest about that, because I think I can make good judgment calls there. So the things that are catching my eye at the moment are coming back to your point about complexity, is startups that are making AI usable beyond proof of concepts or beyond the ML labs. There's been a large amount of AI developer tooling based around Python because that's what's used in the ML labs and what's common in research spaces. I'm now starting to see ones that are focused on languages where I build a production system, the Go's, the Rusts, the JavaScript nodes of this world, and I think that's valuable. So and those are the sorts of things I'm keeping an eye on. I also think evaluation, debugging, and orchestration are not solved problems. Again, because of this, what I talked about, where we've gone from deterministic to probabilistic, it's, as you say, makes everything that little bit more complex or different. I think there's a huge gap between research and reality, or production reality, and so bridging that is important. And there's a handful of companies that I'm definitely keeping an eye on in that space. Again, if you'll forgive me, this personal thing in here is that based on that, I'm also exploring this area with Sailhouse with my co-founder Ed, somebody I've worked with a couple of times before. Because one of the problems that I've found when I've been doing coding in my own time to keep up to speed in AI, much like I need to understand humans and AI systems, is that I've been frustrated with the complexity around the event-driven aspect of it. I automatically think in the system design already. I don't make it synchronous necessarily, but the spinning that up is not quick and easy locally or using a system. So Ed's long been a big believer in PubSub and built on this system, and so what we've been doing in the last few months is tweaking that and changing it to support specifically sort of agent and AI use cases, because we both have needs for that in the code that we're doing in our own time. It's super early, but we both believe, and I certainly believe, speaking me and the podcast, that modern infra will need to change to support these things. It won't just be some of the stuff we have now. It won't, all of the Kubernetes and the cloud stuff isn't going away as such, but we're going to need different abstractions, different helpers, different things like that. So yeah, I want to invest in that a little bit myself to put my money where my mouth is, as they say.
Yeah, is that the only kind of project you're currently working on, or do you have anything else in the pipeline?
That's the big one, because it's taking a bunch of time at the minute. And again, to your point, which I love that you raised this actually about the AI complexity, is that it actually takes quite a while to build a compelling thing that isn't just a flashy website. Like, yeah, sure, there's loads of tools out there that will give me a decent looking website, but the actual functionality, the actual stuff going on, this is how you're using a model, this is how you evaluate it, here's how you iterate, and then decide this is your answer. That actually takes a bunch of effort. So yeah, it's taking a little bit of time at the moment. Well, that's what I spent my Easter weekend doing.
Well, I guess it's a more productive way than kind of what I did, which was absolutely nothing, Claire. So,
Well,
you know, best of luck.
I think I would have. Yeah. I mean, I did go out to the pub for one day, so 1 out of 4 is not bad.
You've ticked one box there.
Yeah.
You've looked after yourself with a drink. Good.
Yeah.
And I know you're working on these projects and you're, running a tech team. But imagine there's advice that has stuck with you that you've got over the years. What would you say is the best piece of career advice you've received that's helping you on your journey?
There's definitely been a change in my thinking over the years, and I've had this said to me many times in different language, as it were. But it's don't wait to be ready. If an opportunity presents itself, just say yes and then figure it out. You do have to be a certain sort of person that's comfortable with that. But coming back to the startup versus big company, I think. But that's helped me take on stretch roles, and I know a lot of promotions only happen once you've demonstrated the thing inside a company, but also that growth happens as you make the leap, as you figure it out, because you refuse to give in, you refuse to not know, and you go and figure out ways of doing it. Even my boss at my previous job had that conversation with me last year at one point, where we were talking about some options, and she's like, "You are totally ready." Everybody needs to hear it sometimes.
I think going into it with more curiosity, anxiety is always going to be there. I think that's the worst advice anyone can ever give someone, which, like in my case, a lot of candidates are very nervous going into interviews. I say you're going to be nervous. I'm not going to tell you not to be nervous. This is going to happen. It's just a very natural part. But I think what I encourage is go in there with a lot of curiosity and you figure, and applying that to every aspect of your life, I think for me has helped me big time. And it's helped me achieve more than I thought I would be able to, because I haven't denied myself the feeling of anxiety, which I need to drive me forward, right? If you don't have that, then you're not going to push yourself, I guess, as much.
Yeah, there's a bunch of memes out there. I'll say memes, but they are actually true in the sense that, growth comes when you're uncomfortable.
It's true. It's true. And but if you were to give one piece of advice to your younger self, would it be just that, go for it, do more?
Well, I think also,
or would it be something else?
Yes, and can I have two? I think one thing that I didn't always feel comfortable with before the "don't wait to be ready" part was that my advice would be that I belong in the room, even if it doesn't feel like it. Coming back to being the only woman in the room, literally, and don't second guess your perspective when it's different. I've often had different perspectives, and it's just adding to the discussion. We acknowledge that now there's been research on that, but maybe when I started, it was like if you didn't group think, then you weren't part of the crew, and often that can be the missing piece.
Yeah, I think that kind of which can be a whole nother podcast, Claire. Again, we have several things I feel like we could definitely have another conversation on, but it brings the whole imposter syndrome thing as well, where you feel like, you don't really belong where you are and you haven't, you feel like an imposter basically. And that can be very difficult to deal with. It can stop you from asking questions for fear of looking silly or stupid, which, there is no such thing. I've definitely had to teach myself to never feel like it's a stupid question. It doesn't matter how silly it is. I've gone as far as telling someone to break it down to me like I'm a 5-year-old.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, I've definitely bridged that hurdle. I'm quite happy to come in and be the dumb person with the team now, as I think it opens things up and allows other people to ask questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's ultimately, if you're breaking it down to me and I'm learning, right, I'm going to know it a lot better than I would have.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I'm a big advocate of that. But yeah, I mean, we've kind of come to the end of the podcast, Claire. It's been great.
It's been a pleasure, real pleasure.
It has. But where can people find you or follow your work if you want to share?
Oh, okay. So I'm KRider2010 on almost all of the socials. So like Twitter or X, if you can call it that. I still struggle. Blue Sky, places like that, and that's even the thing in the LinkedIn URL for me. But yeah, just search for Claire Knight on LinkedIn. I randomly post thoughts on all of those places. Probably different thoughts at different times on all of them. So depends what you're after. Pick your poison. I'm always happy to chat with folks, particularly in AI and developer tools.
I think I'm going to take the opportunity to just send direct messages to you, just asking random questions to pick your brain and stuff.
All right, that works. Yeah.
Yeah, I do like your brain. But a huge thank you to you, Claire, and your honesty, your clarity, and the deep experience that you have. It just brings so much value to this conversation, and I'm so grateful for your time and your story. So, thank you again for joining.
No, thanks for reaching out, and yeah, I've loved the conversations that we've had. So it's been a pleasure on my side too.